light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I'm Sister Who. I sometimes find that I'm going through life in a wide diversity of perplexing situations, doing the best I can, and never quite knowing if what I offer is helpful or not, because I don't get a lot of response from people. But the responses I have received suggest that even when I am most confused, good things may still be happening. And so I've tried to trust that, choosing to trust that as long as I'm doing my best, the divine or someone else or whatever causative agent you want to name sees fit to use that and draw something positive from it for other people. I don't edit my shows to make everything look perfect because I'm not a terribly perfect person and I don't know very many perfect people. At the same time, I understand how we want to do our best, we want to present things as good as we can, but not to the point of being unrealistic. Not like some sort of pulp mill greeting card you buy in a department store that someone may send this card to someone they haven't talked to in ages. And the card says, I think of you all the time, I love you so much, yada, yada, yada. And if someone were to send that kind of card to me, it would be very hypocritical to me. Because on one hand, the card says, I love you so much, and the first thought that crosses my mind is, well, but not enough to actually pick up the phone and call me, or to come by and see how I'm doing, or to involve yourself in any of the ongoing struggles and accomplishments and activities of my life. If we don't believe it enough to do it, I'm not sure if we really believe it at all. And I don't want anything I put out to be just words on paper that with no action or nothing to back them up. There's no integrity in that. It would be hypocritical. But as I'm living as honestly and authentically as I can, as I'm allowing that Sister Who is my spiritual and social and societal voice with which I make my best contribution to the world, that even in my awkward, imperfect moments, it seems some good often comes out of them. And so there have been times where I wondered if perhaps my life purpose orients around living my life in a very open, available, perhaps vulnerable fashion, allowing people to know all sorts of details about my life and not keeping secrets, not hiding from people, not going about things in ways that are surreptitious and secretive, and not responding to questions with the statement, it's simply none of your business. Because of how everything is interconnected throughout the world, I don't know if that's really ever a true statement. There are things that we can each contribute to a situation and things that we can't. If I can sympathize with a friend who wants to develop muscles, I can give advice based on my experience with lifting weights or doing exercises, but I cannot do the exercises for them. They have to do the exercises themselves. As I said in one of my early newsletters, whoever wants the muscles has to lift the weights. No matter how much you love someone, you cannot do the exercises for them. to develop their muscles. They're the ones that have to do the exercises. That's the dynamics of muscle development. That applies to everyone. It's fairly inescapable reality. All that being said, there's something about me living in this open public way that seems to be helpful to people. And yet I hope it's helpful in the sense of allowing or empowering others to reach their own insights and come to their own conclusions. I don't know that anyone should be an imitation of me, because no one else was born to be me. Only I was born to be me. And I'm trying to be me in the way that is most empowering to the world around me. I suppose to some extent, some people would blame it on the fact that I'm autistic, because I tend to be outspoken about things and not censor things that some people think aren't supposed to be spoken in public as much. To me, it's about a pursuit of truth and a pursuit of integrity and authenticity. These are the things that I want to define my life. I'm not so concerned, therefore, whether what someone says is good or bad as much as is it true. So that even if my enemy were to approach me with an insight or a comment or an observation or a question, I don't need to respond negatively to that, because there's valuable information in what they're bringing up. What becomes injurious to me, though, is when someone approaches me and basically disallows my contribution to life, my participation and my place in life. When it's essentially saying, there is no place for you here, go away, get out of my sight, get out of my life, etc. Where exactly was it that they wanted me to go? I don't know that there's a sanctuary or even a way of relocating. I mean, moving expenses are quite high now. Even just to pick up my minimum resources and go somewhere and have some way of living there, it may be unaffordable to me. And there may be other people who would appreciate that I stay wherever I'm at, who would disagree with that person about whether I belong there or not. And so part of it is me trying to figure out, where do I belong, and what is the work that I really am, that I really was born to do. I have found the most resonance and integrity with that in the ministry of sisterhood. That there is something about working with metaphors and dialogue and conversation that seems to be empowering to a great many people. Part of my willingness to speak out, however, means that from time to time I become the whistleblower, to use a common expression. The one who basically, in certain situations in the past, the person would blow the whistle and point out a problem that needed to be addressed. One would think that that person would be applauded and thanked and appreciated, because by being alerted to problems while they're still small, it's easier to address them and to get things back on course and set things right and make whatever improvements are necessary. In some cases, however, and perhaps in many cases, there are people and communities as a whole, even companies, that don't want to know about their mistakes. They may even be fully conscious that they are making mistakes because they have some other agenda that may be selfish and greedy and ultimately destructive. But in their limited humanness, I guess you could say, they are pursuing gain and unconcerned about who is negatively affected by the ways that they accomplish gain. That was when, in reading the writings of Plato from ancient Greece, one of the things I found most disappointing about him is that the ways that he presumed and kind of expected that there would always be someone else to conquer, someone else's resources to take, someone else to be victimized, and that was how a community would sustain itself, by always having the ability to take from other people, and which to me is morally and ethically so objectionable. I long for a humanity in which we have moved beyond that pattern. I don't know that we're there yet, and I don't know whether I'll live to see it, because it's a very long, ongoing process. The only thing preventing it from being accomplished, however, is all of us working together. It really is possible, but it may be improbable in the short term. The challenge of the whistleblower, however, is also the challenge of timing. It's perhaps one of the more overused examples, but just as one of many possible examples, Germany during the 1930s, there were people who saw what was going on and attempted to be whistleblowers, and some of them were ignored. No one would listen to them. Some of them were arrested and taken away and exterminated in the Nazi concentration camps. And some of them remarkably kept speaking out all the way through, and weren't punished per se, but they also weren't heeded. All of this is kind of self-sabotaging and I suppose you could say a kind of societal suicide, because if people had listened to the whistleblowers, they could have addressed problems though they're small and prevented great evils from happening. The world in which we live is such an enormous, complex thing that there's no way any one of us can see all of it. That's why dialogue is so important, even dialogue with one's enemies, and where it is not so much headbutting and arguing about things that needs to happen as a genuinely respectful discussion. I think you're a bad person. And instead of saying, no, I'm not, the person responds, why do you think that? Have I done something that would cause you to think that? Or is there some misunderstanding afoot that we need to sort out and figure out what really did happen, what didn't happen, what was said, what was misunderstood? When you consider how many synonyms and homonyms and different, and well, if you lapse into sarcasm, how many antonyms as well. These are the words that look the same or that sound the same, or let me back up that a second. Synonyms mean the same, homonyms sound the same, antonyms sound opposite, but in a lot of modern idioms are used in reverse sort of ways. I now hear people on the street every so often meaning as a compliment when they see someone's work, they might respond by saying, oh, that's really bad. And what they mean is that it's very good, because the current idioms have shifted in a way that is using understatement and reversal and exaggeration and so forth to communicate things in ways that are grammatically very difficult to pin down. So it kind of comes from how well the two people understand each other. All of that is simply to say that as complex as language is, and as easy as it is to misunderstand which word someone meant, or if they meant it in the same way that I understand it, with that much room for misunderstanding, we should be thankful anytime we do actually understand, and be much more open to the questioning and the dialogue process. That when someone makes a statement that sounds inflammatory or accusatory or adversarial, before one responds with defensiveness, I am not, you couldn't possibly mean that, whatever, to instead respectfully ask, are you saying that I am whatever? to which the other person might say, no, that's not what I meant at all. And then we have a dialogue going, where I can then say, well, what did you mean? What is it about me that is disturbing to you? Or what is it, or would you like to know what is it about you? What about you is disturbing to me? Not because we're trying to play tit for tat or compete over who's controlling the conversation, but specifically with a genuine desire to get to know the other person well enough to collaborate and to interact in a mutually beneficial, mutually empowering fashion. Quite a number of years ago, I read about, I guess it would be considered a psychological, mental, maybe even physical notion or idea. It's something called the butterfly effect. The basic idea behind the butterfly effect is the idea that life is so interconnected, and granted some of it is very, very subtle, but it is so interconnected that when a butterfly flaps its wings on the other side of the world, somehow that effect will carry over and have an effect upon how life is unfolding on this side of the world. The basic idea is that little things can ultimately accomplish very much, but in some ways it's like ripples in a pond that keep expanding and expanding and expanding, getting further and further and further from where they started, until someone standing at the point where the ripples started wouldn't even see how far the effect has gone. I suppose you could say, to take that in a different direction, but the same theme, different illustration, who were the music teachers of the great composers that we study and remember now? Who was Beethoven's music teacher? Who was that music teacher's music teacher? Knowledge and understanding and ability is handed down from generation to generation to generation. There are gifted individuals who have aptitudes in certain areas, but even those gifted individuals are faced with the challenge of how to develop whatever it is they find within themselves, and whether what they find within themselves will be applied to a particular cultural context, a particular geographical context, whether it would be applied to natural sciences or fine arts or music or business. There are so many different directions that every single person born onto this planet could take with his or her life. What becomes really challenging in the midst of all that is when you have an individual who encounters really significant struggles. It brings to mind my friend Lillian Grace Marlowe, who was a trans woman who ultimately committed suicide, but a very brilliant person, very brilliant. And hearing of the struggles she went through to create congruity and harmony between her spirit and her body and her mind and her faith, going from a very conservative religious background to a much different religious background, going from male form to female form, and having this unified consciousness, this unique soul with integrity at the heart of it all. In a sense, a soul attempting throughout life to find itself and to bring itself in harmony with itself. Seeing all of that in her life and the way it played out and the struggles right down to the end, and understanding or retaining, I guess, a belief in the divine as the embodiment of highest wisdom and greatest love. I once we were talking about this once, and I expressed to her that considering how intense and how massive her struggles were, I had to believe that there was some incredibly valuable insight or lesson about life, some incredibly valuable understanding that must be meant to come through her, specifically because it's the only thing that would justify the amount of struggle she had endured. I hope and pray, and I suppose I try to trust that whatever that higher purpose was, it was successfully served, even though her life was cut short when everything became a little too overwhelming for her to deal with anymore. And I think that in itself is another example of a whistleblower. Her death was the last message she could convey to the world that there were circumstances and relationships and situations that seriously needed to be addressed. And no matter who she talked to or how she tried, she could not get people to respond. She could not get people to listen and understand that this isn't right, and it is so not right that you've created a world that it's not fit for me to live in. The first insight, I guess, that at least for myself, I place over and against that is that I did listen to what she had to say. I did thank her for being that kind of whistleblower, for pointing things out, for drawing my attention to things that I might have otherwise overlooked, and living out that gratitude by continuing to address those situations in whatever ways I can. If someone would go to that extent to say, this is something you need to pay attention to, that the rest of us would finally get it through our heads that, well, if it's that important to you, yes, we will pay attention to it. But there are still people who don't want to. Who don't want to pay attention to those things. And I don't think that's a reason to give up. Even those people, some of them will ultimately come around and figure it out, and like Lily, look in the mirror and go, wow, I need to address this. And I need to do whatever I can, even if it takes the rest of my life, to address it. There will obviously be some people who don't. I don't think the people who fail to hear, or the people who fail to respond, or the people who fail to address how uncivilized the world has become, I don't think those people are enough reason for the rest of us to give up trying and to quit working toward a world that is healed and empowered and functioning in ways that the current one doesn't. There have been numerous recent actions of violence in the world. And I suppose if we look at every age of humanity, if you look in the right places, I don't know when human society has not had numerous incidences of violence. Some of them are obvious, some are not. But again, none of those incidences of violence are sufficient reason to give up on working toward peace. Not a peace that is merely the cessation of violence, but a peace that is the unfolding of genuinely empowering life. A peace that is the integration of the entire orchestra of diverse human personalities, all aimed toward the creation of what some may call a utopian world. The wonderful thing about utopian worlds is that they're absolutely possible. And I guess the thing a characteristic that I've noticed in and amongst those times when specific progress is made in that direction is that every single time there is solidarity, every time people come together and accomplish something good, it is so inspirational to so many more people than those directly involved. Because it's as if our faith is restored for a moment, that humanity really does have a chance, and that there's no need to give up, that there's no need to think that this is as far as it goes and this is as good as it gets, because we have so much creativity and inventiveness and love for each other that have not yet even begun to be brought out into the light and to be shared and to be utilized in ways that take us beyond where we are now. In any case, thank you very much for watching. I hope that I've given you some good things to think about.